So good morning from Berlin. I would like to welcome you here in the Cosmos Congress Center, either people being live here with us and also people joining us via Zoom to today's discussion on is Europe a follower or a leader in health research and innovation? My name is Wilfried Ellmeier. In my daily life, I'm a professor of immunobiology from the Medical University of Vienna, but today I'm here in my function as president of the Biomedical Alliance of Europe, which is an umbrella organization from 36 leading European medical and biomedical research societies that together represent more than 400,000 healthcare professionals and researchers. Biomed Alliance is a non-for-profit organization committed to promote excellence in innovation and basic research and research for European health research in general, and also with the aim to improve the well-being and health of European citizens. So is Europe now a follower or a leader in health research or innovation? When we look at Europe in total, compared to other global leaders like the US or China, I think Europe is risking the innovation battle. I mean, Europe spends an estimated of 1,400 billion euros on healthcare annually. And its life science industry has a production turnover about 260 billion euros. Nonetheless, public-private investment, the number of clinical trials, also the numbers of patent registrations filed is much lower than, for instance, in the US or China. Despite outstanding basic research and the progress made in health research in general, an important development of EU initiatives, Europe has not yet fixed really its key challenges. Notable scattered health research efforts among EU member states, limited competence of the EU in the field of health, and restricted public research investments. We all understand Europe is a complex structure, and health remains often organized at the member states level. Health research, however, is a clear element where European cooperation and coordination is really essential. There are many EU initiatives now, including Horizon Europe, which is the EU most important research funding instrument, the Innovative Health Initiative, which is a successor of the IMI initiatives, the proposed EU Commission's priority for a European Health Union, and also the proposed structure for HERA, which is the Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Activity, modeled after the US SPADA. So there are many, many initiatives, but the question is now really, is this enough? How can one ensure that there's coordination between the different initiatives? How can one ensure that all these different gears work together in the proper direction? So actually that we're moving all together in the same direction. What is a long-term vision for European Health Union? What must happen really at the EU level to ensure that we can transform Europe into a true research and innovation hub, supporting excellent research, and also make sure that this translates then to outcomes, for better outcomes to patients. And today we will discuss some of these questions, or hopefully many of these questions, and that we really can make sure or get ideas from prominent and eminent speakers to ensure European positions as a front runner in biomedical and translational research. So I'm really happy to be joined by very eminent speakers, which I will introduce then to you in a second. And before we start our panel discussion and also the presentations, I would like to remind you that you can also post questions either here in the audience then afterwards when we have the discussion, but also via Zoom online in the Q&A box. And then you will also be able, we will read the questions so that you can address questions to our panelists. And with no further delay, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Özlem Türeci, who is the co-founder and chief medical officer of BioNTech, I think a company all of us know now. She's a physician by training, also an immunologist and cancer researcher with a lot of translational and clinical experience. Dr. Türeci has discovered several cancer antigens, and we were heavily involved in the development of messenger RNA-based vaccines, not only recently, already since a very long time. And I think you also have been the coordination and the chief development, the oversight of the Lightspeed project, so really to develop a vaccine against COVID-19 within less than a year. So Dr. Türeci, the online stage is yours, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction and also for the opportunity to be part of this panel. I have to disappoint you from the start of my talk right away, with the start of my talk right away, I will not be able to give the answers to all those questions you have already moderated. It's indeed a grand mission and a grand challenge to work towards an integrated framework and an European framework which strengthens our capability to ensure that we can turn science and technology in deliverables which support mankind. But what I would like to try is to give an overview of the general areas I think we have to take care of, and the overarching challenges or questions we need to address. And for this, I benefit from the experiences which we have made in the course of responding to the pandemic, which for us meant that we had to look into every part of this huge program to ensure that, in this case, our vaccine reaches many people on the world, and had to go in light speed through all those stages through which innovative medicine, in this case, a drug, a vaccine, which was newly discovered, basically, had to go to indeed then also reach mankind. And you know that since March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we interact with each other and also communicate as the entire world went in lockdown, and we have all been forced to, due to this responsibility, to act and to act fast, or including all stakeholders. In our case, who are involved in vaccine development. This achievement of bringing a vaccine within a short time to people would not have been possible without decades of research and investment. In our case, it was decades of research, of public funding initiatives, but also of investors into our company to ensure that the technology of modifying mRNA and making it fit for the purpose of a vaccine to be administered to people could be developed. And this was a very long investment, and it was very important that without knowing what whether this technology would ever be able to help in such a situation, these investments were done. This achievement would have also not been possible without partners. We had partners, business partners, Pfizer, but also a huge network of partners, and the strong commitment of the European Union, of regulators and policymakers. And only this paved the way for an efficient and safe approval and use of our vaccine. The fast rollout again of the vaccine was also only feasible by this very strong cooperation of private sector and the public sector, and also the cooperation with the European Union. Cooperation was really key. Together with the EU and the WHO, we are developing now solutions to make vaccines and drug delivery in all countries of the world feasible and even more efficient, and have been able to ship more than 1.7 billion doses to more than 140 countries or territories around the world, including 57 countries and territories in Europe. And in particular also for the rollout in Europe, very tight cooperation and new ways to cooperate were necessary. We believe that a solution to better rollouts in this case is building up sustainable manufacturing capabilities, and we now have the chance by doing this to democratize access to health together as a joint public-private effort. So the main learnings we have made out of this huge process are the followings. The first one is that we should see the pandemic as a chance, as an opportunity, as a use case in which we can learn for all stages of a vaccine development process, of a response to global threats. It's very important that we don't reach a stage of indifference or fatigue, but use every opportunity of this use case to learn to exactly answer those questions on a technical level, which you have reflected at the beginning of this session. The second learning is that the front end of developing innovations and technology is very important and a place where we need better ways to invest. I specifically am talking about basic research, mechanistic research, translational research, and early development, which happen on the one hand in the academic setting, but also in young companies, startup companies, and in the interface between them. We have heavy investments in this area, but we still seem to lack an efficiency in ensuring that these investments deliverable at the end of the day. In particular, it is important to define in a better way which disease areas, which other areas of interest specifically to invest. It also needs better mechanisms to identify which future technologies will be of relevance and should be invested into, in particular in those areas in which we have cross-disciplinary interaction, and also with regard to education. We need to identify those new disciplines or cross disciplines into which we should invest, because funding without ensuring that we also grow and breed the talents who have the skill sets to actualize the funding is very important. Then we have the back end, and this is in particular in the way we ensure the integrative and cooperative work between companies who deliver, produce, manufacture drugs, medicines, and vaccines, and regulators and policymakers is conducted. It's very important to keep in mind that the process of providing data and dossiers for authorizations and approvals of medicines needs to be integrated with the process of getting into dialogue with regulatory authorities and those who decide about authorization, but at the same time integrate this with interactions, with fruitful interactions with policymakers, not only on the national but also European levels, and payers. Here we have a very fragmented structure which needs to be addressed. And last but not least, the most important contribution which needs to be made for a more fruitful actualization of the innovation and technology potential we have in Europe is that we have to ensure and reinvent, in fact, a climate and culture which is open to innovation and open to science and its translation. I think by addressing all those, we will be able to address the shortcomings we see. Thank you.
And we're looking forward afterwards to the panel discussion where we can actually talk a little bit in more detail about what you have just said. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the second speaker of our today's discussion, which is Jan Geisler. Jan Geisler is founder and managing director of Advocacy, a think tank, consultancy and social enterprise on patient advocacy and patient engagement in research. He has extensive experience in patient advocacy, and he's the patient's representative in various steering committees and advisory boards. And he also acts as an independent expert for the EU Commission. So Jan Geisler, we're looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to this forum. It's a great pleasure also to be here invited as a patient advocate when we're discussing about Europe. I mean, in the introduction, it was said I'm a patient advocate and I've been very engaged in various fields. I also need to say I'm a patient. I've been diagnosed 20 years ago. I've been on cancer trials. I've been having cancer cases all across my family, the closest families affected. And that's why I engage in these things. And my life has been on the line because research happened here in Europe because I joined a phase 2 study. And I don't want to talk about me with my own experience, but I just want to highlight how important it is to have research here in Europe, research and innovation, not in China, not in the US, and not somewhere else, because research happens here, not only because we need to generate great data, but because we also know that research spreads excellence, research trains clinicians, research actually builds infrastructure, and all that is not available even in clinical care if we don't do research all across Europe. And there are a lot of issues around that, that research happens only in EU Big 5, EU Big 8, only where specific funding is being applied. It doesn't happen all across the EU 27 member states, plus the surrounding countries. And we don't have let's say, a coordinated approach, how we make sure that this excellence spreads all across Europe, despite many attempts. I just wanted to say that because I think we're at a crucial stage at the moment. I mean, despite the pandemic, and I think we've learned a tremendous lot on the pandemic, how we can do things differently, where we as patients have heard over years and years that this is not possible. We've always done it like that, and we're not going to do it like that. That's what we heard so many times about telemonitoring, about remote monitoring, about pooling data, about running studies very quickly, about accelerated approval, about post-marketing data. Just suddenly with the pandemic, we can see that it's possible. And I think the big challenge for Europe is now not to snap back into the pre-pandemic world and do it again like we did it before, but make use of the transition and change. And I think Europe is in a crucial stage also because we have persons like Stella Kyriakides. I mean, she's not only the health commissioner, she's a breast cancer patient, which I said on panels years ago when she was fighting for the rights and for research of breast cancer patients. She knows what it means when the life is on the line. And she has kept, for example, cancer on the agenda, despite it would have been so easy just to put everything on the pandemic. But we know the pandemic will go, thanks also to the work that Özlem and her team has done. but cancer will stay. And I'm not going to highlight cancer. I'm also highlighting 5,000 rare diseases about diabetes and other things. And we are far, far, far away from actually having issues and having solved those things. And that's why we have the missions. We have the cancer mission. We have the review of the pharmaceutical legislation. We have the clinical trials regulation, which comes into effect now 7 years after European Parliament has passed it, and so on. So there's a crucial stage at the moment to change things. So I've been asked to talk about patient involvement, and I'm saying that because I think patients have a crucial role in there, because nothing in healthcare will work without patients. And if we don't get them into research, if we don't get them agreed to how research is being done, if they have scrutiny about being guinea pigs, if we don't take the patients with us and make what they really want, the whole thing, what we're discussing here, is not going to work. So use patients as the primary source instead of just having assumptions what we want. And we as patient organizations have transformed. I mean, for me, it's felt more like a revolution than an evolution, what patient advocacy has been going through. Because when I started with advocacy in 2003, almost none of the pan-European umbrella organizations exist. And I was just a guy that had studied business. I had no idea about medicine. I had to work my way, the hard way through how research works. And I've become a research patient advocate. But I must say, if people are saying, aren't we all patients somehow? It's not enough to break your leg and then know how healthcare works. You need to go through a transformational experience of a 20-year-old that you suddenly don't know whether you're turning 29, and suddenly you see research, data protection, and all these kind of things with a very different light. So with that, how does patient involvement help? I mean, it gives you insights into the unmet needs. It gives you insights into patient preferences. It gives you insights into also waste in the healthcare system and everything. And that's why we are not only the support groups that you know, we're organizations that engage in health policy and research. I've been engaged on European policy, on European health policy since 2003. And I got engaged in the revision of the Clinical Trials Directive at about 2005, because we suddenly realized after it was passed in 2001 that it was doing quite a lot of damage to academic research in Europe because of huge bureaucracy and safety reporting, because the same rules apply to no matter whether you're doing a therapy optimization trial or phase 1 or phase 2 study, and many of these things. And we started to work with research groups, with academic research, with the commission, with industry, with everyone, to find out what the problem is and making suggestions to the parliament and the commission to fix it. And what I heard at from DG Enterprise at that time, that they said the patient voice has been crucial to overcome, let's say, the silos where everybody was convinced that it's not them to change, it should be others to change. And we actually took everyone to account in that process. I mean, it's a shame that this clinical trials regulation has taken from 2014, when the European Parliament passed it, to 2022, when it will launch with the CTIS. 7 years in Europe to develop a platform that actually picks up all these things that the new legislation comes into effect. So I think that's something to learn. And I hope we're not going to take 7 years next time again, because this regulation is extremely important for us. Anyway, coming back to what our role is, we as patient advocates, we engage in research. We are trying to help researchers to find the right research questions that matter to patients most. We're engaged in endpoint discussions. We're engaged in selecting the right pro instruments. We're discussing about eligibility criteria and clinical studies to push for more real-world evidence. We're discussing about crossover designs, because we feel that people will drop out of the study when they progress instead of being on the trial until they die. And all these kind of things, that's our day-to-day job. That's we do in leukemia, that's we do in melanoma, that's we do in myeloma, that's we do in Duchenne and many other diseases, but not systematic, because it depends that we have convinced people on the other side that feel patient engagement is relevant, because we haven't yet established a system that patient engagement is the norm and not just the matter of very engaged people that go the extra mile. But I think we've come quite some way, and also thanks to, let's say, EU funding. I've been the coordinator of the European Patients Academy EU Party, which we set up in 2012 with 33 consortium partners funded by the EU and FPR. with many academic centers, 4 pan-European patient groups, different industry players, to train patients about the whole medicine, R&D, and drug development and regulatory process. Because, I mean, like me, I have a business background. I had no idea how research works. And I made it the hard way by trying to read as much as I can. But we would develop the training where we could really get empowered patient advocates that had the transformational experience and the technical knowledge to work with researchers in industry. And that's what we actually do. We have trained about 280 patient experts. We had 4.5 million people on our platform, which we have in 9 languages, to teach patients and patient advocates in lay-friendly language how research works. And I think without that EU funding, this would have never worked, because we wouldn't have funding for that. And it's so small funding just for EU Party. EU Party has helped us to go into evidence-based advocacy, because healthcare is such a data-driven business. You can't do anything without data. And if we come with testimonies and stories, everybody's moved and moves on. So that's why we come with data. We generate data with surveys. We run patient preference studies. We do all kinds of evidence generation on inequalities and access barriers that we can actually go to politicians, to the EU level, to the national level, to research and say, here's the problem. This is what our community thinks. This is where we are failing to provide the right services to patients. This is where research works. That's the footprint of studies. That's the use of pro instruments that are meaningful to patients. This data is extremely important, but we don't have any funding to do that. We just do that out of a mission. But of course, you know how much you can do as a volunteer. And that brings me a bit to the challenges, because we are involved in the cancer mission, in the EMA boards, in the EMA committees, in things like clinical trials regulation and other legislative process. We're answering the consultations of the Commission with regards to the pharma legislation and others. But there's a limit to this. And we need to find out how we take patient involvement to the next stage if we want Europe to be innovative and have patients that they at the center, and not just because they're standing in everybody's way. It's because we do this for the patient community. And I think one of the things, there are a couple of suggestions. I mean, early involvement. Involve the patient community, not when everything's almost set, you need a reviewer. Involve them when you design a study, involve them when you're drafting new policy, involve them when you generate a funding program, and so on, because then the patients can provide their perspective, whether they feel this is really solving problems that the community has. So this kind of patients in all policies is something we've been calling on. And I think that leads me to one problem, and that's a call, and probably Robert can later on comment on that. At the moment, I see the tendency in the cancer mission and the other missions to actually involve citizens. But like I said, I don't want to have my neighbor give feedback on how cancer research policy should work. We're largely ignored as pan-European organizations that do research day by day and work with research in the European Hematology Association, in ESMO, in EFNA, in all kinds of different associations to actually do research. We should be involved with our stakeholders. That also needs to come with resources. We need infrastructure for patient engagement. We need resources, and we need to make sure European funding programs also delineate funding not only for clinical and for machines and for lab tests and for PhD students and for people that work at universities or people that work in industry. We need also an infrastructure to do patient engagement on the large scale, because that way, I think we can really be leaders in Europe and leaders in the world in terms of healthcare and research and innovation. I think we've learned a lot from the pandemic, and let's make use of that. But in contrary to 2001, today our organizations are there to help.
Thank you. I think you also raised several important points, and we will also have time later on to discuss this in more detail. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the next speaker, which is Jan Philipp Beck. He's CEO of European Institute of Technology Health and chairs the organization's management board. As CEO, his overarching objective is to support EIT Health's vision of connecting the healthcare needs of European citizens with policymakers and its big network of over 140 partners to deliver innovative healthcare solutions that can hopefully positively transform healthcare outcomes across Europe. So Jan-Philipp, we are looking forward to your thoughts.
Thanks, Professor Ellmeier. Thank you for having me here on this panel this morning. It's a great pleasure. So you asked me to bring kind of two cases to illustrate a little bit our work at ERT Health. I've done that. But first, maybe with the risk of stating the obvious, I would like to say that, of course, we must not forget that every great story of innovation also builds on great entrepreneurs. And when we at ERT Health look at supporting new and fantastic aspiring companies, we of course look at the need that they want to address and whether they have the science, technology in place and whether there's a business model on the horizon. But we also look at the team and its leadership. Now, remarkable achievements, I think, in research and innovation always require and those remarkable people behind them. For me personally, the founding chairman actually of the EIT and also long time chair of ERT Health, Alexander von Gabin, is a person who has always inspired me because Alex has been a great researcher and teacher, actually in Sweden, in Stockholm, in Vienna, in Stanford, much of that before I was born. But he has also then, as a tenured professor, I think much to the surprise maybe of his colleagues, left that path, created the company Intercell back then, which is today Valneva. It IPO'd second time at NASDAQ. And he also gave back a lot by being active in the policy field, supporting ecosystems and innovation in their development, those ecosystems that he had benefited so much from. And I think it's these kind of, let's say, maybe non-linear biographies that I believe inspire. And I think we have to be much more open to them in Europe and encourage them in Europe. Now, we recently had European Commissioner Thierry Breton with us in Paris at an event with investors. Actually, also very interesting biography because Breton, of course, also was a corporate CEO at some point in his career. And now, I think, Dr. Tureci, you cannot imagine with how much pride he speaks about you and BioNTech. And I think he's right. And I think that you will inspire entrepreneurial scientists for generations. And I'm quite certain of that. And I believe it's very, very important. Now, my first case, building the case a bit for better prevention, actually. So maybe I have to disappoint, but the first case I want to share is not really founded on recent breakthrough research, but a quite established, I would say, truth that physical activity and good nutrition can have great health impact. So now in 27, ERT Health, an ERT Health innovation project that involved actually a lot of collaboration partners, and Dr. Tureci, you have mentioned that, very important to have the region, payers, healthcare providers, researchers involved. And we created basically out of KI a spin-out called the Health Integrator, run by Frederick Söder. Also, again, I think a visionary individual who had quite an established job at a pharmaceutical company at the moment when we launched. Now, the project was focused on people who are at high risk of developing type 2 diabetes. The Health Integrator is a consumer-facing platform, essentially, that successfully tracks and promotes healthy behavior. It's a digital ecosystem, if you like, for healthy people with help and advice all in one place. And the aim is to prevent people who are deemed to be at risk from developing a disease in the first place through a combination of both things, clever technology, but also human health coach support. Now, the BBC recently made a small film about the case, and it is told through the lens of the experiences of one of our users in Sweden, Selma. And she was deemed at high risk of developing type 2 diabetes. She enrolled in the Health Integrator, but not only that, she was absolutely instrumental, she and others, of course, as well, in co-developing with us that solution. And as you just said, Jan, about the role of patients, I think it has been absolutely instrumental for the success of this project. Now, the Health Integrator may look like a simple piece of digital tech, but it took a bit more than 4 years with specialists, with developers, with health experts to develop it. And it's much more than just tech. It integrates a network of well-trained health coaches, communication experts, public and private collaboration partners from all over Europe to actually reach our target group. KI ran the trial that confirmed the effectiveness of the solution that has more than 25,000 users to date and that we are intending to scale. Now, finally, it was also difficult to build an innovative financing concept for such a project. And we wanted to create a new financial instrument to actually create a bit of a business case for prevention. So it's now a 5-year project in the Stockholm region to issue what we call a financial health impact bond tied to lowering diabetes risk factors. So if the project succeeds in lowering incidence, the bond will increase in value. It's funded by a pension fund initially, and that provides financing for the health integrator services. And the payout comes, of course, when people are kept healthy. So this is one of the projects that we ran successfully based on European collaboration. Now, the second piece is about accelerating the growth of massively scalable healthcare companies in Europe, which I believe is of critical importance. So it's not focused on a particular one project, but I want to share with you our learnings from one of our programs that focuses on supporting companies that we believe can massively scale. And we understood that it's often in that period when companies start growing and need to accelerate that they actually may stumble. So we target very young companies that have the potential to address an unmet need, that are backed by strong science and technology, and of course also still maintain these very, very close ties to so many different organizations, be it an industry, be it research organizations, universities. So they have a committed leadership team and a financial runway for some time when we pick them up, and they must be privately owned. Now, we have built a fantastic expert council to deliver that work. It's led by Christoph Lengauer, another person with such a rich kind of biography, scientist, a medical doctor, a company builder, and now a very successful investor with Third Rock Ventures in Boston. Now, the program pairs promising companies with top-flight life sciences advisors who immerse themselves in ideating, strategizing, and also planning the operational execution to really set those companies on the path of success. And with this ambition to massively scale these businesses, the program is built on essentially personal relationships between mentors and mentees. And through individualized guidance, we then support those companies in unlocking really business and investment opportunities in short time frame. Now, we've really built a fantastic portfolio from all over Europe, companies working on preventing drug resistance and cancer, for example, for early cancer detection, but also exciting propositions that focus, for example, on novel antibacterials that are urgently needed. So these are really deep science companies. Now, the program has led to companies raising over 250 million and achieving 4 exits totaling around $1 billion in only 3 years of its existence. So to conclude, I just have 3 messages, and they are not so policy related. They may be at a bit of a different flight path. But I think we have to build optimism in the European life sciences ecosystem. I think we have all reason to do so by creating great success stories. We need to encourage entrepreneurship. We need to encourage these nonlinear biographies that I talked about, and we need to welcome the world to drive also health innovation here. We have to focus also on company growth and scalability, and deepening strong collaborations around companies with great potential. And finally, keep the focus on those unmet needs and better outcomes, as well as solutions, I think, that can support the resilience and the sustainability of our healthcare systems in Europe. They are not perfect, but they are absolutely a great asset. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Jan-Philipp, for your thoughts from perspective of EIT Health. Looking forward also to some questions afterwards. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Karin Sipiter, to introduce Karin Sipiter. She's Professor of Medicine and Head of Experimental Cardiology at the Department of Cardiovascular Science at the KU Leuven. She's a key advocate for the scientific sector and has been active in the European Society of Cardiology, active in the Biomed Alliance, and has also chaired the Commission's Scientific Panel for Health. She's also a member of Scientific Advisory Board of ORI, which is the European Commission Open Research Platform. So, Karin, we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Wilfried. I'll try to move that away. Is that okay, sir? Yeah?
Yeah, it's fine now.
Thank you very much. I was also asked to bring a case to this discussion, and being a cardiologist by background, who then went on into research, I bring the case of research and innovation for cardiovascular health. So, be careful here. Yeah. I'd like to start with highlighting the success story. Heart attack very often used to lead to immediate death. 30% of people just died immediately on their first heart attack. That has come down to less than 5%. And the success story there is one of discovery and multidisciplinarity. And you see at the top left, Andreas Grünzig, a cardiologist entrepreneur working with material sciences to develop materials that were then put into a coronary artery to keep it open. And you see at the bottom left, this new methodology, the imaging, that now indeed has translated in new products. So innovation really advancing the outcomes. Two other important elements have been the international collaboration. The network within Europe for collaboration and globally has been essential in providing the evidence to implement actually new treatment. Not only research and treatment, but also, of course, policies. And in the bottom right corner, one of the important elements that has reduced mortality has been ban of smoking. We should not be complacent. No room for false optimism. The number of cardiovascular deaths is still increasing, and is increasing a lot. And it's worldwide, it's global. To the right, you see the change in cardiovascular death in China, India, Russian Federation. Also in Europe, it is still increasing. So let's turn to the different elements that actually are cause for worry. Dr. Qureshi talked about the whole pathway to come to new treatments. One of the elements is the pipeline of discovery. Drug discovery in the year 2012 was highlighted to be far below the drug discovery in other areas. For cardiovascular, you see the yellow arrow. When we look at the situation in 2019, it's largely unchanged. You see to the left the data from the FDA, and to the right you see the EMA, so the drug approval agencies in the US and in Europe show very few new drugs coming to market for cardiovascular disease. There's been technology development, but very few pharmaceutical development. What are the hurdles there? Maybe there is underinvestment in the research. Again, the pipeline needs to be fed. And there is a continuum of elements that contribute also to the further danger of decrease, which is if there is insufficient investment in the research, you will also attract less people into the research. Young scientists will go where they can find areas to develop their interest. So the other element is the challenges of the regulatory for translation and innovation. And I give here the example of a gene discovery to lower cholesterol or regulate cholesterol levels. This was a 2003 discovery from a French consortium. It led to more studies. mechanisms of actions were discovered, and then the innovation had to follow with patents and drug development. So European discovery, patents filed in the US, very powerful. Amgen, 81 patents worldwide filed. This led to a war on patents between Amgen and Sanofi, the French-based drug company. Now, eventually, the EU granted the market access for Sanofi, but nevertheless, Sanofi decided to reduce its cardiovascular investment, also for diabetes. So these are consequences. There's a whole ecosystem of a pipeline of discovery, translation, patenting, innovation, market access. So we need different elements, as was raised by Dr. Tureshi. We need to have the capacity building, exploiting what is there for the pipeline, but we also need the regulatory environment to enhance translation and innovation. And an element that hasn't come to the foreground yet, we need to match investment to medical and societal needs, and we need a mechanism to identify that. There's a lot of fragmentation in terms of funding, in terms of regulation, that all has to come together. And so in 2018, the Scientific Panel for Health proposed the formation of a European Council for Health Research that would help set out a long-term vision and strategy, but also help into the translation. Then came COVID-19. And COVID-19 really demonstrated this fragmentation issue at the different levels, both of research and of healthcare. And we again spoke out and said we need a coordination platform for the research aspects that will feed in many aspects of the eventual translation, innovation, and implementation. And to the bottom right, you see a pie chart that illustrates public funding in R&D, where on the left, the blue part is member states. 90% of all public funding comes from member states. When we talk about Europe, we have to think not only EU as an administrative body or a policy-making body, funding body. It's together with member states. Although the EU is the motor, and that's to the right, of all multinational collaborative research. So are we entering a new era? I think we are. I think COVID has really, as Dr. Tureshi, actually an opportunity to drive forward the European Health Union. We are witnessing the birth of HERA, that is the Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority, but it's going to be a very focused area of competence of this body. And so when we look at research, let me highlight in one last slide what is happening to the health research. So Horizon Europe was designed before COVID times, but the COVID times have also demonstrated how Horizon framework programs can bring to speed research and investment when it is needed. The whole program is more impact-oriented with new programs like healthcare systems transformation, the innovative health initiatives, and the era for health research, which might be steps forward. They have their own strategic research and innovation agenda. And so all of it has to come together with the EU for Health programs. And so I'm looking to the promise that there would be a co-administration between the two big bodies, which each have their commissioner, DG Santé with Commissioner Kyriakides, highlighted by Jan Geisler, and the DG RTD that is under Commissioner Maria Gabriel. And so they need to come together. And so I'd like to end here and say In my view, we are really making progress. The glass is half full, but we need to keep on working to bring it really full. We still need a comprehensive vision and leadership for health research, and fragmentation needs to be addressed. We are struggling with organizational and legal issues, how to implement, how to work at that. And before I look forward to hear from Robert Madeline, who is much more experienced in the structures, what could be done and how it could be done. I want to share my concern with what Jan Hessler said about the involvement of stakeholders. It's very important to have stakeholders on board and to not only rely on consultations of everyone. You need expertise to discuss these matters. And I'm going to end here and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karin, for raising these thoughts. And again, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Before I introduce the last speaker, I would just like to remind the audience, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box on the platform. You can rather raise your question you want to ask to some of the speakers. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Robert Madeline. He's the chairman of FIPRO International, which is a micro-multinational public affairs consultancy. He was first a UK and then an EU civil servant from 1971 till 2016. And he also served as the European Commission Director General for Health from 2004 till 2010. So I think it's pretty fair to say that you have really a vast, extensive experience in the health field. So we're really looking forward to your thoughts.
So thank you very much. I was very flattered to be invited, and I hope that I can say a few things. I think I can be very brief because so much that's good has been said already. The first thing I would say, which might sound a bit pessimistic, is that we actually need everyone, and the challenge is bigger than health innovation. If you look at the world today, the climate community can't fix the climate, the biodiversity community can't fix biodiversity, and I would suggest that the health community can't fix health innovation. So we have to really think actively whenever we're setting up a structure about having points of contact for the rest of the world. And if you think about that in the context of health innovation, the issues that have been described as affecting our capacity to innovate for health in Europe actually affect innovators in every sector. Access to capital, access to data, especially for secondary use, adequate big platforms around HPC or data analytics. And I would add also the soft sciences, as we're seeing today. How do you get people to want to get vaccinated, even though we have a stable of safe and effective vaccines to which Europe has made a big contribution? So think about finding new allies. Secondly, I would say, having been through previous pandemic crises when I was at the health DG, both the tail end of SARS and the full glory in 2009 of swine flu H1N1, I fear we risk wasting this good crisis as well. So traditionally you say never waste a good crisis, and Dr. Sipido was saying we're optimistic because there's a lot of attention. I would just maybe issue a second warning note, which is we managed to forget many of the lessons we learned in 2009. We forgot them. That's why the PPE was out of date and in the wrong place. That's why the Health Security Committee was not being staffed at the top level from member states, and its messages in January 2020 found it hard to get through. So we need to set up new structures to make sure that the lessons of the crisis are learned. On the positive side, one of the things we did make a structural decision for after the swine flu crisis was emergency research funding. And because we had made that as a legislative decision, the money was there and it was a success at the beginning of the current pandemic. So we have to think in a similar way about structural solutions, not just papers that say we will remember next time, because we clearly don't. I think then, if I can try and summarize what I would see as the lessons for success in health innovation, the first, as I've said, is connect, not just collaboration among the insiders, but finding new allies. And if I can pick up the question about patients groups or citizens' involvement that was raised both by Dr. Teresi and by Jan Geisler, I think you need both. It's very clear that in an area where you have a solution and you have therefore a patient network, or you have a research path and you have a patient network, patients are a success factor. And we've seen that in HIV/AIDS, we've seen it in the work Takeda does with, for example, the chronic colon colitis, Crohn's disease communities. We've seen it in the collaboration for oncology data in Europe, CODE. So involving patients is clearly a success, but you don't know who will be the patient. Had we had a citizen network around vaccine research before the pandemic hit, maybe vaccine hesitancy would be better managed than it is today. So I think involving people in the paradigm of responsible innovation, which after all is a conceptual innovation made in Europe, that I think is the second part of connecting. So connecting with unsuspected allies out there beyond health innovation, innovators elsewhere. EIT Health can help that. Connecting not just with patients, but also with citizens. Secondly, be bolder. This goes to what Jan Geisler said already about the need for speed. Europe is very slow, as I used to say also when I was a DG, so I'm not making it up now, I'm retired. But we also need to be bolder. One of the reasons we didn't structure the solutions that we learned about in 2009-10 was hesitancy from national governments and from the European Parliament to leave power at the center. And you see it all over again with the HERA debate. It's very important to be bold and to structure collective, smooth decision-making, especially in time of crisis. And then, apart from connecting and being bolder, I would say be consistent. And there are good news stories there. For example, when I was actually not in health, but already doing research, we launched the first flagship projects under Horizon 2020 and the Human Brain Project, which will come to an end only next year. So a decade of effort in human brain data analytics and simulation. They're already spinning off into a new not-for-profit entity so that the assets of research are captured and kept. We don't do that enough, so being consistent. And then finally, and this is a point I think that several speakers have made, we have to get the landscape right for innovation. My last gig in the Commission was to write a strategy review on innovation in Europe, and I entitled it Opportunity Now, because I think innovative capacity in Europe at its best is breathtaking and world-beating, but it is unevenly distributed. So we have the know-how, but we haven't scaled it. And I think part of that goes to faster regulatory innovation. Telemedicine, for example, needs consistent reimbursement, which we're beginning to see bubbling under in Germany and France, but it's still too slow everywhere else. MedTech, especially for remote patient monitoring, again, something Jan Geisler mentioned, badly needs a more accommodating approach. So I think getting the landscape for innovation right, not just putting more money in the innovation pipeline, is the final recipe for success that I would advocate. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks again to all the speakers for the short presentations. And I would like to now open the panel discussion. I will initially ask some questions to the speakers, and then hopefully there will be a lot of questions also from the audience. You want to ask? Yes, sure.
I'm Rainer Sauerbrunner from Heidelberg University, and as a university...
Just sorry, please use the microphone.
Hello, I'm Rainer Sauerborn. I'm at Heidelberg University, and you mentioned, Dr. Tureci, you mentioned the universities and innovation potential in collaboration. with startups and with big pharma. But what is it concretely that's missing? Is it innovative curricula, PhD programs that cut across, let's say, epidemiology, modeling, molecular biology, business, public regulation? Do we need comprehensive new tracks? And then the second possibility, do we need new forms of collaboration with you as a startup, with Pfizer, with Sanofi? Because universities are sometimes loath of collaborating, particularly with big pharma. But I think we need to do more here. And what could it be?
Yes, thank you for this excellent question. In principle, it's all what you have already listed. It's about education, having the right skills and talents on both sides so that one can communicate and connect. It's about the mindset, which should allow that cooperations are not just contractual definitions, who should deliver, but that the cooperations really support common, a joint, basically, goal. And it's also about new forms of cooperation, which ensure that with sustainability, joint goals are reached. So this is indeed an important field or area in which we have to come up with smarter ways. And also when it comes to funding, what we also frequently see that joint funding mechanisms of which are meant to foster cooperations and partnerships between universities or institutes and companies need to be such that they ensure that these cooperations are easier to make and are more sustainable.
You nicely described what it really takes to bring at the end maybe a vaccine to market or to the patient, actually. So you started from basic research, you mentioned translational research, then of course there are clinical testing, phase 1, there's production problems and not problems, but you have those production factories and things like that. So the question is, since this is really a long-term process, as you mentioned, it takes decades of research, and I think you started in 2000 working on messenger RNA vaccines, and you need a lot of different partners. So the question is, can we learn, and actually, because you also interact now with many international partners, can we learn something about this process from other countries? What are they doing better? Are there examples what we should adapt in Europe, for instance, from the US? In terms of making sure that this sustainability in funding at the various levels which are required for drug development?
I think we need to think a bit more, and this relates to what we just heard. We should be more bold. We should think more from a clean slate perspective. And as use case, I would like to use patient-centric or personalized medicines. I have been working in oncology for a long time now, and it still is our premier area in which we will stay active with our drug developments. And personalized medicine is something everyone is talking about for many years, and the technologies, the science, the concepts for true personalized medicine are already there since many years, but we are not able to implement them. And rather than looking into other countries, how others do that, we need to look from a clean slate perspective and ask the question, what is in the way to true personalized medicine development. And there is in fact a lot. Our entire methodologies to conduct clinical development, our entire methodologies for regulatory guidance for drug development, our policy, health policies, our reimbursement and payer methodologies all do not support this. So I think it's better, rather than trying to put band-aids on situations we have, to really ask the question, what is our vision for our healthcare system? For me, for oncology, it's true personalization of treatments. And what would we need to do in an ideal situation? And that comes with concepts, for example, like point of care manufacturing, CAR T cells or adoptive T cell therapies, for example, where one would wish joint efforts of the public sector and the private sector and other challenges.
Okay, thank you. Since you mentioned also patients in your statement, I would like to ask Jan Geisler, you said it's important that there's early involvement of patients, very on also when already a concept of a grant is established. So my question would be, where do you still see the main barriers? Why is this not happen more often or regularly? What are the barriers and how can we actually overcome these barriers?
Well, I think all essential ingredients are there in terms of education, in terms of frameworks, in terms of tools, in terms of organizations, and everything is still not being done because I don't think we're still understanding the value of patient engagement largely enough that we understand that research is getting better, quicker, and more targeted with less waste if we involve patients. I would say that's one thing. And I mean, if I take one step back, and a topic that hasn't been mentioned before, and then actually say what's the role of patients and how can patient engagement change that, is that we haven't touched about the whole issue about data in Europe. Because I mean, we're like in the Stone Age in Europe and in sharing health data and making best use of it. And that delays research a great deal because everybody's sitting like hens on their nest on their research data, whether industry, academia, out of different interests, because there's publication interest. I want to be the first author. I want to have this study. I want to be lead investigator, or of course, industry out of commercial interest. And that way we do a lot of duplication. And in the end, we usually, and I hear that because I'm in one of the biggest big data EU projects, Harmony, and it takes us years to get data sharing agreements signed, both with academia and industry. So we can't do big data research just because data that patients have provided for research is not being used for research because just they're cheap excuses. And the cheap excuse is GDPR or data protection. And what I always ask is, have you asked patients whether they would be willing their research? And that's where, when it comes back, what's the barrier? It's because at research design, we don't even think about data sharing later on with others. And probably we should rethink the way we distribute taxpayer money for generating data that it sits on hard disks and is not being shared with other researchers, that they can draw their own conclusions. And we would like to have access to the data to actually get conclusions on quality of life research, on research priorities, on outliers and whatever. And I think that's probably the whole data protection and the whole issue about how we deal with data in Europe in this small in every country, and huge fragmentation is probably one of the main barriers. And just to end with a positive note, I mean, we have huge chances at the moment because we have the European Health Digital Center, European Patient Digital Center. We have the Clinical Trial Information System launching next year. We have the European Health Digital Space. There's a lot in the current programs for Horizon Europe and for all the different legislations that are under discussion that address digital data. Let's get this right. And I think we need to involve patients, that we don't fall into that data protection gap later on, that we're saying, yeah, we can't do that because we don't have consent. I think we're ready for it, but you should involve us at that stage.
Okay, thank you. Following up this, Jan-Philipp, I would have a question for you, because you also mentioned as in one of the examples that the health integrator related to diabetes, that this was a success story and that you had developed new financial instruments. So actually, how can we find the next success story? So is there something what Europe really can do to stay innovative and also to support a bottom-up innovation?
Oh, that's the billion, trillion euro dollar question. I think there are a few things that could be done. I think Robert Madeleine has also hinted maybe at a few. So what I find striking when, for example, just to start somewhere, when looking at the New Horizon Europe program, for example, I think there are three pillars, and the third big one is around innovation, right? And that should be the pillar that actually tries to deliver some of that or support the delivery of that. And I think it has a poorly crafted vision around it. It doesn't have much vision, to be honest, at all. There is no idea for a common European innovation area. There's the EIC that has now substantial funding, but I think relatively little thinking around how to actually build sector focus or to actually address particular societal challenges. Of course, the EIT is there, and we are now collaborating also more closely with the EIC, but also all of that is still quite embryonic. So I believe it would be good to create more strategy in that area, also to decrease the fragmentation that we have with the member states. I think it would be really good to create more alignment and to look at the stimulating or the enabling environment in the policy area that can support innovation, and why not to do that also in connection to that pillar. So for example, I believe in Germany, the legislation that has been put in place to accelerate or fast track digital health, I think that's actually quite innovative. Can we do more to see how this could be replicated in other areas? So I think we should develop a better, stronger strategy also in Horizon Europe, particularly for innovation in that pillar 3, and see how the different instruments, be it the EIC and the EIT, can also work much stronger and better together to provide more effective support to entrepreneurs.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to remind the audience, so if you have some questions, please put them in the Q&A section online. So Karin, we've heard now already a little bit about different ideas that one needs a long-term vision, one needs sustainability, one needs the integration of the patients early on, one needs also to have to think about innovation. And you put it on one of the slides that the SPH also proposed the establishment of a European Council for Health Research. So how could this fit in all these different needs which are required for efficient innovation and research? So what are your ideas behind this European Council?
Yeah, thank you, Wilfried. If you allow me to first complement what was being said about data and thinking about it in terms of Europe as a leader, I believe that indeed we can set an example with the patients on board for a value-based development, where the GDPR was developed to protect privacy. At the time when it was written, the Biomed Alliance was actually quite active in ensuring that there was an opening to use data for research, and in particularly health research. So we have the possibility to call on public interest for data use. And I think this is really one of the strengths of Europe, that we have this value-based and that we have this engagement of people. So I just wanted to add that to the opportunities we have. What we do miss, and this comes to your question, is that we do not have a clear leadership at European level to develop the health union and the research that comes with it. I always give the example, if you look towards the US and you say, where's health research? How is it organized? Who gives input? Well, there's NIH. there's a National Institute for Health. In Europe, everything is fragmented across member states. And so we miss at the European level this embodiment of who is going to set out the strategy. And Robert Medlin said we have to be bold. Yes, we have to be bold and say we need more than what we have now. And we need it at European level because that's where we bring together the different visions. And how difficult it may be in Europe, it's at the same time a strength that we are able to bring different visions of member states, different approaches together and learn from that. And maybe coming to this implementation of a structure, it's a big challenge. And when we talk about it at the stakeholders platform that brings in funders, that brings in patients, that brings in universities, at the same time, we feel a lack of competence. To navigate the European structures and the institutions is very difficult, and we need help. We need political support, and looking at the big picture, it will have to come through member states who take a lead, a European Parliament who broadly represents all citizens, and we need the Commission on board to design the structures. But we need to keep asking for it, and we are not at a stage where saying, this is a ticket, just subscribe, but we are getting there and we need to keep working with all stakeholders.
Okay. That brings me actually to the next question I would like to ask to Robert, because I think also in your presentation, you said that we need everyone, that we have to build up, find new allies. And now here is a stakeholder group. I mean, we all have ideas which go along the line that we need something in a structured way. So what would you advise to us, or the research community, all the different stakeholders? How can we concretely influence EU policy and ensure really that our voices are heard? Because I think all the speakers in the panel somehow raised the issue of fragmentation, involvement of patients, creating an innovative environment, sustainability. How can we reach the member states? How can we reach the European Commission? What would be your advice?
So it's a vast subject, but I think that firstly, we should, again, put a structure in place. So there's a question, should it be the Health Council has a little outreach mandate, or should it be maybe EIT Health that does it for the Commission? But we need a place, a watering hole, and some funding, and somebody who manages the access to the watering hole, basically. So you need a structure, and that needs a decision, which ideally would come, as I agree with those who've said, you know, this should be part of setting up a health union or setting up HERA. Don't mind. The citizens part is actually more, I think, for laboratories, innovative companies, principal investigators. The most impressive biomed CEOs I've known have been those who say, I go to a different primary school around where I work every month, once a month, not just to do the politically correct, but because when I come back, I understand better how to frame what I'm doing. They've never actually come back with a multi-million-dollar breakthrough brainwave, but I think that getting out has to become something that we expect and train young researchers to do more of. And I think that's quite important. So I think firstly, a bit of structure from the top down, and secondly, a cultural change from the bottom up.
I will follow up with another question later, but there's a question now from the audience. So you want to read it?
It's a question from the Q&A, and the question is for Dr. Teresi. So how can the EU's success in developing vaccines for COVID-19 translate into leadership, into innovation for tackling the world's oldest disease, such as malaria? And also, how can the EU collaborate with leadership in the US, Africa, Asia for a global approach to ensure access to low-income communities of common strategic interests? So it's two questions.
Again, it's as Robert said, we should not waste this crisis because we are learning on the most technical level, and God is in the details of things, how we could use the existing frameworks and methodologies or further develop them for specifically the COVID vaccines to ensure equality of access. The task is now to use what we are building as stringently and coherently as possible, also for other diseases, which are infectious diseases, which are neglected, which are underserved, but still of high medical need. And this is actually happening. One example is malaria, where we, for example, are working very closely with institutions like the EU. And here EMA, for example, plays an important role, the regulatory agencies, but also with WHO and the African countries to build on what we have already kicked off for the COVID-19 vaccines, namely to the first steps to build in those countries ecosystems which make them independent to manufacture their own vaccines. And the path to this is not via patent waivers. That would be too easy and would not achieve this objective and goal. It is indeed by a stepwise approach to build partnerships with manufacturers and developers in those countries, to connect with the scientific ecosystems in those countries, to bring training programs, to organize technology transfer, to build a workforce which can be involved in manufacturing, for example, in those countries. And this is something we have started, where we see strong support also by the EU, and which we think is the right way to do.
Thank you. So since we were also discussing about finding new allies and joining forces, so I would like to ask Jan Geisler, how can patient advocates and researchers really join forces, or where can we do more together to really have an impact on EU policies? So how is your view about this?
Well, I think we need to think more holistically about collaboration, because at the moment we're working still in silos of basic research, of clinical research, of care, and patients are involved here and there. And I think what is different to industry, what academia and patients can really achieve, is think through the whole cycle. Think from patient access first, and think about whatever we are developing, how do we make sure that all patients in need will actually get hold of that? And then work backwards and say, what data do we need to get from current care? What data do we need to get from clinical research? And what open questions, what are the big questions we need to clarify in basic research, and try to connect those links. And I mean, the patient community can support these endeavors. And a lot has to do with data, has to do with early phase trials, but also has to do with collecting data in the clinical care setting. And I think that's the crazy thing at the moment. What we're doing, we're spending billions to develop drugs, then we put them on the market, and then we sell them for high prices, but we don't collect data anymore because registries are not funded, data and care is not being collected. So we need to connect all these dots all throughout. And I think academia and patients have a crucial role in connecting these dots, in making sure we think end to end, because industry will, of course, have their focus on commercialization. So on a much later stage than we have probably from basic research down to care. And I think that partnership is needed.
Okay. Karen, you wanted to add something on this?
What I wanted to add to that, to complement that I think it's necessary that we have a place where we meet. And Robert Madeleine talked about the structure. We need a multi-stakeholder meeting place to develop that together. What I'm worried about is a model where you see consultation by one central body who consults all the stakeholders and then decides, but does not put them together. We need to sit together, academia, biotech, industry, funders, patients, citizens, and discuss where we together want to end up. Otherwise, we have indeed too much advocacy for a certain point of view, whereas it is the richness is to bring the different points of view together into a common development. So I really hope that if we can develop this comprehensive vision and strategy, that it will be based on a multi-stakeholder platform.
Can I just add one thing to that? I think one thing we need to think about are the, let's say, which are the vertical discussions that we do, like in cardiovascular oncology, because we want to have solutions for specific cardiovascular disease. And then we need to get all players, let's say, together. And then there are the overarching questions, the horizontal things where we need to talk. And I think, I mean, what Özlem was actually saying, I mean, that's the best example. What we can see, their focus was on oncology, and suddenly the innovation is applied in vaccination.
Absolutely.
And the same happens for us in patient advocacy. We've learned so much from the HIV community, how they work with researchers and policymakers, because they were angry in the 1980s, and we're using their methodology, but not so angry. So I think we can learn a lot also across the different disease areas. And that's why we need to think vertical and horizontal. And I totally agree that's needed.
Okay. I would have a question also to Robert again, because you mentioned that you had some outreach activities, so that you went back to schools, discussed there with people. So I think the COVID-19 crisis also has shown, I think science was never discussed as publicly as last year, right? And now also the way it was communicated and the media are fast. I mean, you have different opinion, internet. So the question is, did this increase or the trust in science? Because I think there's still a lot of people who don't believe in vaccination and this type of issues. So what is your opinion about this? How can we, as a community, as different stakeholders, also make sure that if there are great medicine is available, that as much people possible also take advantage of this?
So I think one of the lessons I've learned throughout my professional career is, if you wait until you need someone, it's too late to build trust. And that's why I think this should be a bottom-up process where, in health as well as in other innovation communities, we get out more. Very important. So a primary school child knows that they've met a scientist. Just think about that. Do they all meet scientists? Do they know they've met scientists? I don't think so. So you need to get to a situation where people know what a scientist is the way they know what a policeman is. It's part of civics. In terms of vaccine hesitancy, I mean, it's a huge and soft science field. And I would actually add a point, which is, when we say connect with everyone, it's not just people beyond health in other innovative hard science areas. It's also the soft sciences. I think a lot of the challenges we're facing in trust in science are about learning better how science should frame itself in talking to the wider community.
Okay, thank you. So unfortunately, we are really running out of time, so that time flies really. I think it's a good sign because it was a very fruitful discussion. So I think I have to close the session. I would really like to thank our speakers. I think you really provided a lot of food for thoughts, also for future discussions. And there are many important topics. Dr. Tu, you just mentioned, for instance, education. We didn't discuss about this, but I think it's also important that we educate probably in different ways our future generation of the next scientists, right? I think this is something we should also think about. And I would also like to thank questions from the audience and also online questions. And I think it had also made it clear that thinking about whether Europe is a follower or a leader, in the European health in general is a complex issue, but it's absolutely essential to think about this. I think health of European citizens ensure the wealth of our society. So it contributes to overall well-being and also to a vibrant economy. And let me just conclude by saying, I think we all would agree, or we all hopefully agree, that there are excellent research facilities and research and excellent brains in the EU, in Europe. And I think we should really or must take advantage of this and support them in a coordinated, transparent manner along what we would call the translational value chain, so from basic research until clinical research, to really continue generating new knowledge and to ensure that excellent basic research results really translate in effective treatments for European patients and European citizens. With this, I would really like to thank you again for the great session, for the great discussions, presentations, and hopefully see you soon at another similar occasions where we can discuss the future of Europe. Unfortunately, we didn't save Europe yet, but I think we have a lot of ideas and thoughts, and I think together we hopefully will be able to improve and to move towards the right direction. Thank you very much.